Alrighty, I'm just doing a little bit of some check-over work on your little Honda 4Trax. I think this is what this has to come down to is this is a 1992, and I know it's not the main bike that you use because you have a side-by-side. If this is just something that you want to be able to run around in the yard with, then I would sort of watch the video and decide if there's things that you would like to fix, or if you want to leave things as is, or what you would like to do. And you let me know, and once you have a good idea, then I can do an estimate up for anything that needs to be repaired. So let's go through your electrical first. As I think I mentioned to you on the phone, I had put a shop battery in it, and was able to start the bike up and drove it around the yard, and it seems to shift fine. That was another issue that you mentioned, that we'll get to that in a minute. So the old battery was junk, so I ordered a new one. I've installed that. I've had it in the bike for a day or two, and there's no, I checked the charging to make sure it's charging fine. There's no issues with that, and it doesn't seem to be depleting the battery at all as it sits. So, you mentioned that sometimes there's sparks when you hook the battery up, and I have no doubt. There's all kinds of funky old wires going on in here. So these two wires here, I've left them disconnected, and they sort of connected into all this wiring stuff. And if you follow some of those wires around, it sort of tees in a way, I guess, right there. And there was a wire that came out here. That's a wire that's been cut off, and it goes to these wires that are hanging up here, and basically none of them go anywhere. So I see no reason to have those hooked up. So what I would do is, I'm just going to take unless you want me to do differently, I'm just going to take a pair of snips, and I'm going to snip that wire back as far as I can. And all this other stuff, besides the winch one, which we'll talk about in a minute, you can leave it there, or you can pull it out. If you want me to pull it out, I can pull it out. I can just take a pair of snips and cut all those wires out that don't need to be there. Let's see. Since I'm here, one thing I know I did forget to do is we'll check the air filter. And that's in good shape. So we won't have to, we'll just do maybe clean that a little bit, and that's going to be it. So that's a good thing to see. Next, your winch. This is where I think your sparks have been coming from. So if this is in here connected to the battery, and you happen to hit a wrench on it, or hit this against a piece of metal or anything like that that's grounded, you're going to get sparks, guaranteed. So right there is ground, here's ground. So if you're in here and you hit the right thing, then for sure you can make that spark. The winch on the bike is not wired up correctly. Even the little winch on my snowblower has some kind of a solenoid built into it to handle the high current that the winch will pull. But somebody's wired this one right through the hand control. I mean, it may be that this is the way this one came. It's very possible, but I would have a contactor on it. That's up to you. We can leave it the way it is if you want, but it's just that you always have power hooked to an accessory directly to your battery, and if there's any shorts or any spots in that power side of that wiring that's touching on metal anywhere, that's going to deplete your battery, and that'll also make sparks. So just so you know, since I've disconnected the winch and those two other wires, there has not been any sparks. So you decide if you want me to fix the wiring up for the winch and put a solenoid on it, or if you just want to leave it disconnected and don't worry about it. It's completely up to you. I would say your biggest issue here I wouldn't connect those for sure. Next, shifting. I drove it around the yard. The only thing I noticed about the shifter is that when you downshift sometimes, it wants to hit on the frame. There's zero I can do with that except replace the shift lever, because this lever has been welded. And that's probably why it hits on the frame a little bit every once in a while. There's nothing I can do about it. I have to replace that lever altogether. So if you can handle getting your foot in underneath, I mean, there's a little part of your footwell. I guess it's a boot guard. I think that's what they used to call them, something like that. This part's bent up a bit, so I can smack that a few times with a big maul, knock it down so there's a little bit more space in here for your foot to fit underneath when you're upshifting. So if that's something you want me to do, I can do that. Engine needs an oil change for sure. I would change that. Normally I would say to pop that little sediment bowl off the bottom of that, off the bottom of the fuel petcock, but I have a feeling when we do that we're going to have to for sure have a new seal and stuff in it, so I would order that before I did that, because you can see where it looks like it might be seeping a little bit. Next, rear diff has fluid in it, which is awesome for an old Honda. Some of them will have no oil, and some of them will have mud, and some of them will just have water. It depends if the seals are leaking or not. So it has fluid in it. The bearings seem to be okay for the axle. It's not flopping all around. I can't tell you the condition of the brakes or anything inside. I know they're functioning. Unless you really want to know, I would not take that apart at this time. And once again, this comes down to how much time and expense you want to put into the bike. But for sure, I changed that diff fluid. I did notice on this side, because I usually reef around on the wheels and the axles just to see how the bearings feel like, when I put a bike up on the lift, the hub's trying to give up. So either the hub or the axle splines are getting in pretty rough shape, and that nut has to be retorqued. By the looks of it, it's been hot. You kind of get that brownish sort of look from metal filings and stuff. But anyway, I'd have to take that off to see what kind of shape it's in. See if that was the hub or if the axle itself that the splines are wore out on. If you want me to do that, I can do that as well. Next, up on the front end, not unexpected. Sorry for the noise. These wheels are bolted onto little spindles, so there's no axle on the front of this. This is a two-wheel drive bike. You have a little bit of play in the wheel bearing or the spindle. So the thing is sometimes these spindles would get wore after a time, and didn't matter how many times you replaced the bearing, it would still have a little bit of play in it. The other side has exactly the same amount of play in it. So the other thing it might be is the nuts that hold everything together. I do believe there's a kind of a little preload thing that you have to do to make sure they're tightened up properly. You have to look in the manual to be sure. It's been a while since I looked at one of these old bikes. Let's see. Ball joints are both pretty good on both sides. You have a little bit of play in the tie rod ends, not very much. If it was a bike that you're going to run around trails all summer long, and this was springtime, then I maybe would say replace them or come back in 25 hours and replace them then. But if you're just going to use this as a yard bike, then you might want to leave it as is. Lower steering post bearing, same idea as the tie rod ends and the wheel bearings. It's got a little bit of play in it, but nothing's going to fall apart with it. It still turns fine even when you're driving around the yard and there's weight on the front of the bike and stuff. So if you want to leave that as is, then you can. Then you get into things like your hydraulic brakes are working at the moment. I can go down here and try and see if I can adjust the Mini to make it so that they come on a little bit sooner. But my experience with drum brakes on Hondas is that you can adjust that you can adjust the brake shoes all you want. Drum brakes just don't stop really well. So it may or may not be an advantage to be able to try and adjust those. The other part is sometimes if I pop that plug out, unless somebody's been really diligent keeping these brakes in good shape, I'm probably going to find that all the adjusters are seized up anyway, and then you'd have to take everything apart. And then you start looking into having to rebuild the front drum brakes on them, which is another big expense. So right now the brakes work. That's I guess what I'm getting at. Anyway, I'm not going to prattle on any longer. I got to check and make sure that the headlights and taillights work. I never checked that. And if any of the things in the video, besides, like I said, I recommend the fluids and a spark plug, and maybe clean that little sediment bowl out for your fuel petcock. If there's anything else that you want me to do to the bike that I've shown you in the video, then let me know, and we'll see about getting you an estimate to get it fixed up. Anyway, have any questions? Let me know.